So today I want to talk a little bit about what it means to be Khalifah of Allah and how we can use that information in training the children. And because it's very important in Islam for children to learn that they are Khalifah of Allah and what their responsibilities are and how they carry out those responsibilities. So just first, we'll just discuss the concept of Khalifa. And Khalifa actually is an Arabic word which translates into English. When translated into English, the best word in English for Khalifa is the word vicegerent. And vicegerent is, I was really quite highly educated before I became a Muslim, but I had never heard the word vicegerent. And I think virtually no English-speaking people who are not Muslim would know that word. Actually, often in English, if people know that word, they know it with a mistaken spelling and pronunciation. Instead of vicegerent, they say vice-regent, meaning the same thing. And what the word in English vicegerent means, and you'll see the relationship to what it means in Islam. A vicegerent is somebody who is appointed by a leader or a king. So they don't choose themselves to be vicegerent, or to be vicegerent. A leader or a king chooses them. And what the leader or the king chooses them to do is to act in the place of the leader or the king. And that while they're acting in the place of the leader or the king, they are not to do whatever they please, but they are to specifically carry out the responsibilities that the leader or the king wants them to do. So basically, the leader or the king tells them what he wants them to do while they are representing him. And they achieve the goals that the leader or the king has, not by any power they have of their own, but when the leader or the king makes them into the vicegerent representing him, he gives them the use of his power. So they have, the only power they have is power that has been given to them by the leader or the king. So this is very much a very good explanation of what Allah has done with us as His Khalifa. He chose us by making Adam, by giving Adam the special qualities that allowed Adam to be Khalifa. And then Allah has told us very specifically what He wants us to do as Khalifa. In general, what He wants us to do as Khalifa is with ourselves and for others to act perfectly in accord with His will. And He gives us all of the abilities, powers, and whatever that are needed to successfully carry out our role as Khalifa, that He breathes those into us when He breathes His Spirit in. And that is when He gives us some small number of His attributes. Theoretically, Allah's attributes are infinite in number. We list 99 names or attributes of Allah, but that is just a tiny portion. And then, of course, Allah could not give us the fullness of His power with any of those attributes, because Allah's power is like infinite, and you could imagine a being as limited as we are trying to exercise absolute power. We would probably actually, honestly, in some of the areas, would probably actually destroy us to have that much power within. And so only Allah can have that power in an infinite level. So we just get a little tiny bit, enough though that we need. And although it's a little bit a thing you have to be very cautious in saying and thinking in Islam, because the last thing we ever want to do is think that in any way we are we are like God or anything and commit shirk. But we do have to realize that how really wonderful this role is, that Allah gives us a little bit of the experience of what it is to be like God. See, we get to participate in the God experience, although we are not God, because we get to do what God would want done, and we get to use the same powers, the same attributes, with some small degree of power that God uses to carry out His will. So it is like it's like the most remarkable opportunity that we are given that exists in the world. And we want that when we talk to the children about it, we want them to understand how really magnificent and wonderful and exciting this opportunity is. You know, it's not like, oh, well, yeah, I'm just given this job to do. No, it's the absolute best job that could ever be. And it is part of what makes us unbelievably special. And this, as I said the other day, we want the children to understand how really, really special they are. The more special you believe you are, the more likely you are to live up to your special nature. Then, while in general the responsibility of Khalifa is to perfectly carry out the will of Allah and help others to do so also, the early scholars broke that down into 3 specific responsibilities. And I've changed the wording here because it makes it a little easier. Also because in English there's a semantic problem, which I'll mention. For example, the first responsibility, which I say is to make the self good. Originally the wording was to perfect yourself. Well, 2 problems with this. One, in English, the word perfect is spelled the same as the word perfect. And so many people have never heard the word pronounced perfect, but they have heard it pronounced perfect. And so when they read it, it looks like perfect yourself instead of perfect yourself. And perfect yourself makes no sense in English. Perfect yourself means to make yourself perfect. But this is really, and it is important that the children understand that this is what we are here for. That we're not here just to be okay. Right? Just being okay is not good enough. We are supposed to achieve whatever degree of perfection we can in our lives. And Allah has put within us an absolutely amazing potential. As I mentioned the other day, any average human being born is born with a potential to be anything any human being has ever been. So that means we have really, really huge potential within us. So part of perfecting yourself is to express as much of your potential as possible. But to make it easier, or particularly giving it to kids, the concept of becoming perfect sounds often a little bit too far away for people, and it is not overly specific. So for children, we change the word perfect to good. So, and we say the first responsibility then is to make yourself good. And we do want to explain to them that being good is not just being well behaved, but it is learning a lot, it is learning about Islam, it is loving Allah, it is loving to pray, it is doing your obligations in Islam. All of those things are part of making yourself good. Then the second one is to help others become good. Because it's no good if we only try to make ourselves good. If we live in a world, if you are trying to make yourself good, and if you live in a world of other people who are not trying to make themselves good, it makes it really difficult to make yourself good, and you'll be very limited. And also, in Islam, we're supposed to help each other. So, in the helping of each other, we help others become good. And then the third one is making the physical world good. And often we add to that clean and beautiful. Because, and this is something that sometimes I say to kids when I'm talking about this. We look at the world today and you know, we breathe the air and we drink the water, but in many places the air is not very nice and the water is not very nice. But even in the places here where the air is the nicest and the water is the nicest, I say to them, but how do you think the air was and the water was when Allah first created Adam? Because Allah had made the world perfect to bring Adam into. So I think to myself, I wonder what the air would smell like and the water would taste like back at the time when Adam was created. And the air and the water was exactly the way Allah wanted it to be, and human beings had done nothing to alter it and make it not as nice. See, even if you go to the, you know, way up at the top of a mountain or something, so oh, the air is really fresh. Yes, but there's still stuff in the air there that human beings put there. Every inch of the whole planet is being covered by stuff in the air that is unpleasant. You know, there's like radioactivity in the air, there's various chemicals in the air. Absolutely everywhere in the very nicest of places. When Allah first made the world, none of that was there. And so really our ultimate goal is to perfect the physical world. Now the original, two things. First, let me just say, you'll notice number 1 and number 3. This is a very important point. Number 1 says make yourself good. Number 3 says make physical world good. But notice number 2 does not say make others become good. It says help others become good. And that is in there for a very specific purpose. Several things. Allah has told us in the Quran that there is to be no compulsion in our deen. Now, for some reason, the most common interpretation of the scholars of that saying, there is to be no compulsion in our deen, seems to be to say we are not supposed to force others to become Muslim. And of course we are not supposed to. But that is, I think, a very limited understanding of the statement that Allah has given us, that there's to be no compulsion in our deen. Because the word deen means, the best I think you can say in English is something like complete way of life. And if you just take it semantically for what it says, it seems like Allah is saying there is supposed to be no compulsion in the Islamic way of life. And that is consistent with our role as Khalifa, because important in our role as Khalifa is that we do what Allah wants because we want to do it, not because He makes us do it. And there are 3 places, at least in the Quran, where Allah specifically says, I could have made you this way, but I didn't. I could have made everyone good, but I didn't. I could have made everyone Muslim, but I didn't. I forget what the third one is. But there are 3 specific places. So what we're hearing here is Allah gives us a general statement. We're not supposed to be compelled to do our Islamic, to do what we're supposed to do in Islam. And then 2, Allah tells us specifically He doesn't make us do some very important things like be good or become Muslim. So if all that is true, and that's the way Allah treats us as His Khalifa, that's the way we should treat others. So we should not try to force others to become good, but we should try and set up the circumstances that will help others to become good and encourage others to become good and to reward others for their good things. And in the classrooms, we want to do a lot of this. You remember when I talked a little bit about the laws of learning, and I said reward is when if you follow any response with a reward, that response will tend to increase in the future. technically it's increase in rate and magnitude, meaning whatever you reward will happen more often in the future, and it will happen to a greater degree in the future. So, say for instance, you see a child being kind to other children, and you mention to them, oh, that's really nice how kind you are to the other kids. Then they get a reward for their kindness, which we would expect, given the rules of learning, that in the future they will be more kind and they will be kind more often. And so we want to give lots and lots of notice for the positive characteristics that the children have. And that is one of the ways of helping them to make themselves be good. But also we want to teach the children to notice good things in others and to reward them so that they can help others become good. And as I said earlier, we want the children to participate in all of the responsibilities in the school. Like if there are anybody's behavior is not right behavior for the school, we want the children to help in their second responsibility as Khalifa. We want them to help the other children be good. Because if say for instance you're disruptive while the teacher is trying to talk, then I would say this is not being good. And we want the whole class to help the children get over that. So and often, because it's important what word, one of the reasons about having the word Khalifa, aside from the fact it's such an important concept in Islam, which by the way, let me just say something about the importance of the concept of Islam. I have read at least one or maybe more Islamic scholars have said that second only in Islam to the concept of Tawheed in importance is the concept of Khalifa. Another thing is that we are told that on Judgment Day, when we are judged on our actions, that we are specifically to be judged on our actions as to how well we carried out our responsibility as Khalifa of Allah. So I mean, if that is the case, it's very, very important that we understand exactly what we should be doing as Khalifa if we're going to be judged on it someday. By the way, several years ago, when I did a tour of 12 of the states of Malaysia, so I missed a couple of states, but I was giving a talk on a scientific proof of the existence of God. And I took the opportunity to do an informal survey of somewhere between, I don't know the exact number of people who came to the talks, but somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000. And I was starting to get interested in the concept of Khalifa and what people thought of it and knew about it then. So I asked 3 questions to all of the audiences. And the first question was, how many of you know you're a Khalifa of Allah? And 98-99% say they know they're a Khalifa of Allah. So it's like very widely spread knowledge. We all know we're a Khalifa. Then the second question was, do you know what the scholars have said are your responsibilities as Khalifa of Allah? And then about 5% say yes. But even then, probably if they had to write down what they were, I doubt 5% would have gotten those exact 3 or the other wording. But then the really question that was quite shocking, or the result was quite shocking, the third question was, how many of you in the past month, in anything you have done or said, have thought about yourself doing that as Khalifa of Allah? 1/10 of 1%, right? Which is 1 person in 1,000. Now, with this concept being that important, oh, and by the way, the other thing that I forgot that the scholars have said, that Allah would not have even created the universe if it was not for the purpose of having somewhere to place His Khalifa. So the whole universe exists so we can be Allah's Khalifa and have a place to be His Khalifa. So with all that being the case, for only 0.1% of Muslims to have remembered that in the past month, that they were Khalifa. This is really, we're not doing very, very well. So this is when I started to think this is like a lost concept or a forgotten concept in Islam, but an extremely important one. But we have to consider why something might be forgotten in Islam, something that important. And the only conclusion I can reach is that Shaitan, of course, who wants to make sure Allah's plan does not get fulfilled, would try and make us forget the most important thing that we can possibly know to make Allah's plan work. Because Allah's plan definitely depends on us successfully being His Khalifa. Allah has said if we don't successfully become His Khalifa, He will replace us with another people. So it is obviously critical to Allah's plan for His physical creation to have a successful Khalifa. And so what this really means is, what are we really saying here? Because I want to be real specific about this, what Allah is telling us to do. And when I finish telling you, you're going to see how amazing it is, this responsibility Allah has given us. The other day when I was introducing how learning took place, I was telling you about how first Allah created protons, neutrons, and electrons, subatomic particles. Then He created atoms. Then He created molecules. Then He created simple biological life. Then He created complex biological life. Then He created Adam. So all of that He created before He made His Khalifa. The whole purpose of me telling that was like to show you how Allah made sure every level of His creation did what He wanted it to do, right? So Allah made the subatomic particles, the atoms, the molecules, the simple and the complex biological life. He made them all do what He wanted them to do. But then, after Allah created Adam, He essentially is saying to us, I have taken total responsibility for making sure my plan for the physical creation unfolds the way I want it to. Now I am turning over to you the responsibility for the completion of the plan. That seems to be what our responsibility as Khalifa is. To continue the successful unfolding of Allah's plan for the physical creation. And as part of that, the original wording on number 3 up there was instead of making the physical world good, the original wording, which was amazing for 1,200 years ago, the actual original wording was to perfect the world of space and time. Perfect the world of space and time. What is the world of space and time? The world of space and time is the whole universe. So it looks like Allah's plan for His Khalifa is to take over the fulfillment of the goal of all of physical creation, the whole universe full. And to give you some idea on how big this job is, when you look up at the sky at night, on a clear night, there's a lot of stars. Does anyone know roughly what number of stars you can see at night? Okay, if you were to count all of the stars you can see, right? Maybe you took a picture and then you individually counted each one. From Earth, we can see 7,000 or 8,000 stars. That's that's really a lot of stars because our sun's a star, right? So that means like there's 7,000 or 8,000. If anybody gets really tired, it's better to sometimes change a physical seating position or something to try and to stay awake. So since a star is actually a sun, and many of them are going to have planets around them, this 7,000 or 8,000, that really sounds like a lot. I mean, that would be huge, right? But what I'm going to write on the board now is a number which is a fairly accurate estimate of the number of stars in the universe we can see with telescopes and other instruments. And we can't see further than this because of the laws of physics. So better telescopes won't mean we'll see any further. I won't go into why now. I mean, I can be very specific why we can't see further than that, but there's no reason going into the physics of it. Just take my word for it, please, that we can't, there's a limit to how far we can see because of physics. And within that bubble that we can see with our instruments, there is a certain number of stars. And this is going to be the number. That many stars in the known universe. The whole universe Allah has created is much, much bigger than that. But we can see that many. That number is 10,000 billion billion. I mean, a number which, although we can say, we cannot imagine. We just know it's a one with a lot of zeros after it. It's impossible to conceptualize a number like this.
Is it when you put the telescope on Earth?
From Earth, yeah. You can see roughly that many stars. I'll tell you exactly how they got that number. They pick a section of the galaxy and of the universe, and they assume the whole universe is homogeneous or more or less the same. So they pick a great big section. And in that great big section, they say how many galaxies are there. A galaxy is a grouping of stars. We live in a galaxy called Milky Way. It has somewhere 150 million to 150 billion to 200 billion stars in our galaxy alone. And our star is like 2/3 of the way out on a small little arm of this galaxy. So they said, how many galaxies are there in this great cube of space? And then they said, okay, what part of the whole sphere that we can see that is viewable is this? And we multiply that number times how many times you could fit that cube in there. So then they know how many galaxies they are. Then they say, what is the average size of a galaxy? Our galaxy is a little bit bigger than average. The average size galaxy in the universe has about 100 billion stars. And there are about 100 billion galaxies in the universe. So that when you add 100 billion times 100 billion, you get 10,000 billion billion. So that's a rough estimate of how many stars there are in the known universe. Like I said, the whole universe is much, much larger than that. And I can prove that with a thought experiment. And thought experiments are interesting because we want children to learn how to think and how to get the most information possible out of what they are given. So there are certain things which are not provable. I mean, since we can't see beyond a certain point because of the laws of physics, how do we know what's beyond that point? Theoretically, anything could be there. So how can I tell you what's there? So I'll tell you with a thought experiment how I did this. I said, okay, if from the planet Earth, I can look in this direction, I can look an amount of distance that's referred to in light years, approximately 15 billion light years. I can see that far. So here I am, this is the radius, 15 billion years. The diameter is twice that. Because if I turn around, I can see 15 billion years in that direction. If I look this direction, I can see 15 billion years. Now, if I can hit from here and see 15 billion years from now, what if there was somebody on a star 15 billion light years from here looking at me? I would be on the edge of what he can see. But if he was to turn around just like when I turn around, he can see 15 billion light years on the other side of him. And so therefore, this bubble that has the 10,000 billion stars, which is about 30 billion light years across, that is a small bubble in a universe that we have no idea how big the whole is. And so since Allah has I didn't say directly to us, but by interpretation of the scholars, the implication is that Allah wants us to perfect the world of space and time. So then what Allah wants us to perfect is this 10,000 billion stars and everything else eventually. So sometimes to kids, because kids like interesting things and they're fascinated by science fiction and that, I say to them, and I can legitimately say this, although I can't say for sure it will happen, that if the human race stays around for long enough, maybe we'll come up to a time when we have Muslim starship captains, like in Star Trek or Star Wars, right? And they're going out through space, and these spaceships, they're full of Muslims who go out there and they perfect all of these places, because maybe Allah has made lots and lots of planets out there and wants us to go out there and inhabit them and perfect them all and bring Islam to the whole universe. See, maybe that is what Allah wants us to do as His Khalifa. It is within the possible and probable range of what Islamic knowledge allows. Nobody could say that is not the case, because it definitely could be the case. Now that's quite an exciting possibility. And I mean, it's an absolutely awesome responsibility to be given. Then another thing, already, see, I'm sure if you didn't know this number already, you would feel like this number is quite amazing. You know, wow, that many stars. I mean, that is like hard to believe, but true. So then you start to get some idea of Allah's greatness. Let me give you a more significant idea of Allah's greatness. Because we say Allahu Akbar, right? Allah is greatest. But often our idea of great comes from the human conception of great. But Allah is great in a way that is like almost inconceivable to us. So sometimes I've heard people say something to the effect that, you know, with Allah being so busy with so many things, how can He pay attention to me? You know, we can wonder, look, I'm sort of an insignificant person. There's 7 billion people on the planet. Allah has to run, you know, the stars and the moon and the planets and everything on the planet and 7 billion people. How can He pay direct attention to me? So I'm going to tell you how much direct attention Allah how much Allah can attend to. When I was talking about subatomic particles are really, really tiny. If you take your little fingernail, which isn't very big, how many subatomic particles do you think make up a little fingernail? Now, I don't know the exact number, but the number would be called trillions. A trillion is 1,000 billion. So a little fingernail is trillions of subatomic particles. If a little fingernail has trillions of subatomic particles, how many subatomic particles do you think the sun and the 9 or 10 planets and the moons around it have? I mean, how many little fingernails would it take to make up that much? A number bigger than trillions, I'm sure. I don't even know how big that number would be. So it would be a really huge number, right? Then you multiply that number by 10,000 billion. And that's how many subatomic particles are out there. And every single subatomic particle is constantly under the direct influence of Allah. Allah knows what every single subatomic particle is doing, and He is constantly sending information to each one by light messengers, photons of light energy, telling them, doing two things, sustaining their existence and telling them what to do. So Allah is actively directing that many subatomic particles simultaneously. So it's not easy, it's not hard at all for him to pay attention to each one of us. Now, that level of greatness is beyond human comprehension. And you see, and Allah does that without it taking any part of his energy at all. See, that's not Allah's full attention paid to do that. That is a portion of his attention that is insignificantly small, and he can do that. So sometimes it's important to give a sort of graphic picture of Allah's greatness, because we can't picture Allah, but we can discuss what Allah is doing, and that we know he is doing because we can observe it being done, and that gives us some little grasp of how great Allah is. With Allah being that great, you see, he is infinitely greater than that. And this shows an objective way of seeing how Allah's greatness is beyond our comprehension. And what is beyond our comprehension is just an infinitely small part of Allah's greatness. So we need to use things like this, ideas like this, to get over to children so they can really grasp what it is that they are Khalifah of Allah and what it really means to be Khalifah. Then, since Allah wants us to do these things, Allah has given us a way to achieve them. So how do we carry out these three responsibilities? There is a specific word for the way that Allah has told us to do that. And that word is jihad. To strive in the way of your Lord. And in the non-Muslims, and particularly the Western people and the Orientalists and media people, they define that word jihad as holy war. Now, in Islam, there is no such thing as the concept of holy war. Even if we had to go out and fight on a battlefield for Islam, that would be jihad. But we don't even then say we are out there in a holy war. We say it is unfortunate that the necessity has made us go out and fight with other people. So, at best, war is considered an unfortunate necessity in Islam. So it is by no means jihad is holy war. Jihad means to struggle or to strive, but it is a particular struggle or strive. So it is fair to call jihad the holy struggle. And what exactly is the holy struggle? The holy struggle is the universal battle of good versus evil. That's exactly what jihad is. In every single instance in the whole universe, Allah wants good to win over evil. And good would be defined as anything that aids the fulfillment of God's plan for his creation. All of those things would be good. Evil is anything that stands in the way or impedes the successful fulfillment of Allah's plan for creation. So, theoretically then, say for instance, since Allah's plan, when we see it, first he created subatomic particles, and then he made them into more complex groupings of atoms, and then he put the more complex atoms into molecules. If there was no good reason to, if you were to break up say, a water molecule, H2O, and break it up back into 2 hydrogens and an oxygen. And doing so did not serve Allah's purpose. Like, you know, if you broke down water to have oxygen to breathe or something, that would be a good purpose. But if you just did it, say for instance you had a process that caused that to happen as a byproduct, but it was not serving no good purpose, then that would be considered evil. You see, because that is, Allah's plan is to increase the complexity of the physical material that He created at a very simple level. So good and evil becomes not a subjective thing, but an objective thing. See, often people say, oh, yeah, good and evil, but good and evil is subjective. No, it's not subjective at all. Good and evil is absolutely objective. So it doesn't matter what your opinion is, it matters what the reality of Allah's creation is. So anything that aids the fulfillment of Allah's creation is good. Anything that stands in the way or makes Allah's creation go backwards, then that is evil. And since Allah's plan is for all human beings to perfect themselves, for society to be perfected, and for the physical universe to be perfected, anything that goes against that is evil. Anything that goes for it is good. So our responsibility in life, and the responsibility of every Muslim until the end of time, is to carry on jihad. And so jihad is the struggle of good against evil. To give an everyday example of this, one time, a long time ago when I first came, or when I not first came, but when I was in Malaysia quite a few years ago, and I was riding the bus, and I used to think it was very nice the way schoolgirls in Malaysia, they wear correct Islamic dress, you know, the tudung and the dress they wear. It was like a nice, correct thing to see. So I was riding the bus, and there was these 2 schoolgirls on the bus standing there waiting to get off. I thought, that's really nice in Malaysia, you know, nice Muslim schoolgirls. It's really nice to see. And when you get on the bus, they give you a little piece of paper saying you paid your ticket. Now these two schoolgirls, I noticed as they stepped off the bus, both of them almost at the same time, they stepped off the bus and they threw this little piece of paper on the ground. Now, is that making Allah's physical world better or worse? See, it is making it worse. So they did not carry out jihad there. Jihad would have been holding on to that little piece of paper till you get down the street to a garbage can and throwing it in the garbage can. And while they were doing that, while they were, from when they stepped off the bus to the time they got to the garbage can, they would be jihad warriors. They would be Muslims striving in the way of Allah, you know, in the battlefield of life. And that is what it is. Because all of life is a struggle between good and evil. Absolutely everything that happens is a struggle between good and evil. And the idea of jihad is to look at life as a struggle of good and evil and make sure always good wins over evil. And that is what we are supposed to do as Allah's Khalifah. And this idea we have to get into the children's minds very powerfully and very deeply. So earlier I was talking about overlearning. So we'll talk more about this later, but just in general, I would say in every class, each time the children take a class, or you teach the children a class, we should have some minimum amount of times that the children hear some way or other that they are Khalifa. 3 times in every class. Just to have an objective number. So that by the time the children finished in the school after 1 year, they might have heard, I don't know, 20 or 30,000 times that they are Khalifa. Every time you write a message into the consciousness, if you write the same message over and over, it spreads more widely in the consciousness, and it gets more deeply into the consciousness, and it gets harder to get out of the consciousness. So we want the children to just have the fact that they are a Khalifa of Allah just so deep in there that their whole lives they will never forget. Like the 5,000 or 10,000 people I asked, In the past month, did you remember you're a Khalifah of Allah? Only 1/10 of 1% said yes. If you were to ask the kids after they finished 6 years in school here, how many of you in the past hour thought you were a Khalifah of Allah? 100% would say yes. See, it will just become a natural part of their life to perceive themselves as Khalifah of Allah. And as Khalifah of Allah, they will know that they are to always, in everything they do and say and even think, be sure good always wins over evil. And that is how to carry it out. So how do we carry out jihad? How do you carry this out? Commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. And that is exactly how we make good win over evil. Right? We command the right and forbid the wrong. Those two girls, when they got off the bus, what they should have said in their mind, something like, oh, I've got a piece of paper in my hand, it would be convenient to just throw it down on the ground, I don't need it now. But if I did that, I would be making Allah's planet a little bit dirtier. So I don't want to do that. So I'll forbid myself to do that. And what is the right thing to do? Hold on to it till I get down to a garbage can. So they would command the right and forbid the wrong. In every instance of carrying out jihad, whether you do it with words or thoughts or actually physically, it is always a matter of commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. And then, of course, good always wins over evil. Then comes two questions. How do you command the right and forbid the wrong? Did Allah tell us anything about this? And Allah said, argue in the way of your Lord with beautiful words and wisdom. So, in commanding the right and forbidding the wrong, if anybody happens to smoke cigarettes, don't think I'm being particularly rude or saying this, but I personally believe, and for the last 10 to 20 years, virtually every scholar who has issued a fatwa has said that cigarettes are haram, including a consensus of the ulama at Al-Azhar University put out a fatwa to say smoking cigarettes is haram. So I feel personally convinced smoking cigarettes are haram. But of course that doesn't make it haram for everybody, because we don't have a caliph, and we don't have a ulama for the whole, who can issue fatwa for the whole ummah, so nobody's fatwa is really binding. And people can still say smoking cigarettes is makruh, and technically for them they are correct. But I don't know if you guys have ever seen it, but I have seen at mosques before that sometimes Jummah on Friday, while the khutbah is going on, people who like to smoke cigarettes, they get very desperate for a cigarette. So after the Jummah is over and they're leaving the mosque, they've got the cigarette out, and I've even seen them with the cigarette in their mouth but not lit yet, as they're walking down the steps of the mosque, and light it right when they get to the bottom. Now, to me, this is very little different than if they got a can of beer and opened it and are ready to have the first sip when they get out of the mosque. Right? Haram is haram. So I would like to command the right and forbid the wrong. So what if I go up to this guy who I don't know, and I say to him, smoking cigarettes is haram. That's a terrible, sinful thing to do in Islam. And I say, you shouldn't smoke cigarettes. And I slap it out of his mouth. Would that be a very successful way to command the right and forbid the wrong? No, it wouldn't at all, right? Am I going to get him to stop smoking like that? No. But am I going to get him to hate me? Yes. Might he hate going to the mosque? Yes. He might even hate Islam if people treat him that way. So that would not be successful. When you command the right and forbid the wrong, Allah wants you to succeed. If you're in a situation where you can't succeed, Allah doesn't even want you to try. Because Allah, I don't know whether Allah exactly said this, but in Islam it is known, if you are involved in a warlike jihad, and you don't go out on the battlefield if you know for sure you're going to lose, There's no reason to go out on the battlefield if you know you're going to lose. You wait until you have a chance to win. Then you go fight for all. The same thing is true in commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. If you don't have any hope of successfully doing it, don't try, because you'll just make things worse.
This is the Battle of the Ditch. That was based on the same concept. Rasulullah didn't go out, the Muslims didn't go out as an army, but they fortified themselves.
Yeah, in battles they knew they could win, they would go out and fight. But this one they knew that the people coming were way too many, so they didn't have a hope to go out and fight. So they used a different means. So we have to be careful in how we forbid the right, forbid the wrong, command the right and forbid the wrong. And the way Allah asks us to do it is with beautiful words and wisdom. And beautiful words does not necessarily mean pretty words. Beautiful words, and actually it doesn't even mean words, it means communication. Positive communication. So beautiful words here are communication between people that the person who gets the communication enjoys or likes. It is words that people like to hear, or nods or smiles or pats on the back or whatever you give the kids or people. All of that comes under the concept of beautiful words. And wisdom, you have to have the two together, right? Not just beautiful words. It has to be beautiful words and wisdom. And wisdom doesn't mean just wise words. It means that you do it in a way that you will succeed. I'll give you an example of somebody who was using non-verbally, but what would be called beautiful words on the behavior, but they didn't know what they were doing. So they did it very unwisely. I used to be Director of Parent Training for ABIM, and at an ABIM meeting once, at the back of the room was an old man, 60 or 70 years old, and he had his little grandson there. And sometimes grandfathers really love their grandsons a lot. I mean, just hugely love their grandsons. So this man wasn't listening to the talk at all. As his grandson is walking around, this man's just sitting there like this, and he's just watching his grandson. Wherever his grandson goes, he's just watching and smiling. And the little boy, who was about 4 years old, a half-grown cat walked by, and the little boy went at the cat, and when the cat walked by, he just went like that, just pushed it in the ribs a little bit with the toe of his shoe. And then looks at his grandfather, and his grandfather was sitting there, he goes, this comes under the category of beautiful words. He gave a positive communication to this child. What happens after you give something positive after a response? You expect it to increase in rate and magnitude. So a few minutes later, this cat walks by again. This time the boy goes like that at the cat, and kicked it in the sides hard enough to make it have to jump sideways, not to fall over. Looks at his grandfather goes. Now his grandfather loves this boy, right? He doesn't want to teach him something terrible, but he wasn't using any wisdom. See? And so it can be dangerous if you use beautiful words without wisdom, because you can reward bad behavior also. Bad behavior, when rewarded, will increase, just like good behavior. Little cat walks by for the third time. This time the boy tries to kick it as hard as he can. The little boys are 4 years old, are very uncoordinated, and he missed the cat and fell over. So his grandfather runs over and picks him up and hugs him and kisses him, and, oh, you okay, my little grandson, and not hurt. So he gave him lots and lots of reward for trying to kick a cat. So we have to be really careful that we are rewarding what we think we are rewarding and not rewarding something we don't realize we're rewarding. I have seen lots and lots of that among parents and teachers in my life. It's very easy to fall into that. And the one other thing, just very quickly, if you're going to command the right and forbid the wrong, you need to do it with high taqwa, meaning you have to have a very good understanding of what right and wrong is. I would say taqwa, although it gets defined in many different ways, I think a good definition is like to be God conscious, so that you see the world the way Allah would want you to see the world. And therefore, if you see the world rightly, you know what is right and you know what is wrong. And how do you give the kids high taqwa? You have to tell them lots and lots of revelation from the Quran. They have to know what it says in the Quran. They have to know the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad. They have to know his Sirah, and they have to love those things. And then they will get high taqwa, particularly if they taught to use their aql well. And that is really the whole process. This is what we want to get over all of these things to the children. We want them to know their Khalifa and how wonderful it is. We want them to know the 3 responsibilities: to make themselves good, help others be good, and make the physical world good. And they need to know that their life is a life of jihad, a struggle of good against evil. And they need to know the way to carry out that struggle is for themselves, within themselves in their mind, and to others with their words or actions, to command the right and forbid the wrong. And they need to learn enough about Islam to really know what right and wrong is for themselves and for others, and to get their taqwa up high. And when they talk to themselves and to others, they are to do it with beautiful words and wisdom, which means to do it positively and successfully. We want to teach the children specifically that.